everyone, and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll, where the books you read and the people who write them come to life. Today we are privileged to be joined by Rabbi Yaakov Yosef Reinman, a noted mechaber svarim, as well as the prolific author of many best-selling books, including those are by Reinman, written under the name Avner Gold.
Avner Gold.
I don't know if this is the first public exposure of Rabbi Reinman as Avner Gold, which we'll get into. But first, let's start off with your upbringing, the influences in your younger years, and then we'll get into your writing career.
Well, I grew up on the east side of New York, and then we moved to Crown Heights. I went to Hassan Sofer in the east side, and afterwards I moved to Chaim Berlin. I was 14 years old when I moved to Chaim Berlin, and I had the great schus of learning by Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Shurkin in the last year of his life.
What grade was that, Rabbi
Shurkin? I was in the 10th grade, but it wasn't always parallel. That was a third year Beis Medrash, but in English I was in 10th grade. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't the only one. There are a number of people.
So in the morning you learned in a higher grade than in the afternoon?
Yeah, it was not unusual.
Mm-hmm. So Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Shurkin was one of your Rabbeim in Chaim Berlin?
He was my first Rabbi in Chaim Berlin.
First Rabbi.
And third year Beis Medrash. And it changed my life. It was a revelation. Rabbi Yaakov Moshe Shurkin introduced me to the world of Lamdas, which, I was a pretty good bacher, but Lamdas was just dazzling. Mm-hmm. And his shir, he just learned Gemara, Rashi, and Tosfos. No Rishonim, no Achronim. And I thought that was fantastic, because when you learn many Mefarshim, the Mefarshim become another thing that you have to learn. Like you learn Gemara, you learn Rashi, you learn Tosfos, you learn Pnei Yeshua, you learn this, you learn that. You have just more information. But really, that's not what it's supposed to be. They're supposed to be there to help you understand the Gemara. So what he did was that I'm sure many of the things that he taught us were taken from Sfarim, but he didn't attribute any names to them. So it was just the ideas, the concepts, and it was incredible. And the shir was also very interactive. Like he used to say, he used to ask a kasha, and expect people to say a teretz, and tell me a hakira, and I one time he asked the question, and I gave him an answer. So he turned to me, and he points at me, and he says, "London." It changed my life just by doing that. My view of myself as a person who has to work on understanding and really getting to the tifkai, to the Gemara. It just changed it. It wasn't just okay, now I get we used to get bechenas from Rabbi Robnik. And, my shir always failed because we didn't know what the Ktsoyis and the Nesiva say. Mm-hmm. One time I cheated. I went to the other Bachar, I took the Bechina first. I asked him what he asked about, so I went and looked it up, and I was able to pass the Bechina. I even got an Orchas Tzadikim as a prize, but it didn't come from the Shir. Mm-hmm. The Shir, he never mentioned Rishonim, never mentioned Achronim, never mentioned the Rambam, just focus, understanding the concepts and the ideas of the Gemara. That was incredible. And
so you would say Rav Shurkin shaped your Derech Halimut.
And afterwards, I learned after he was nifter, maybe a few months after, almost a year. So he had son of Michal Shurkin. And Michal Shurkin organized the Chabura of Bachrim. And we used to learn on Shabbosim. We met Friday before Shabbos and met before Mincha. And we used to learn straight through until Motzei Shabbos. Then we used to go to his house and we used to take notes, and a whole week we wrote.
Where did this Chabura meet?
In a shtibel in East Flatbush called the Deja Shtibel. I don't know if it still exists, but it was just, we learned in the back. It was not far from where he lived. And it was, I was in it, and Rabbi Yosef Eichenstein, and Rabbi Yaakov Bussel.
Both Rosh Yeshiva later Rosh Yeshiva of Edison.
Yitzchak Sarashevsky, who's very, very chashuv lamdan, and Rav Shlomo Cohen, Rav Cohen's brother, who was also a tremendous Balkishrin. So he organized this small group, and that's what we did. And it took it to whatever I got by Rav Shurkin, so Rav Michal brought it to a different level. And that's where I come from.
Now later on, you learned by Rav Hutner, but you did have other Rabbeim. You had other Rabbeim in between, right?
It was at the same time.
Same time.
I was in Chaim Berlin for 4 years. First year was by Rav Shurkin. The second year was by Rav Cohen, and the last 2 years by Rav Hutner. And but concurrent with that, I learned with Michal Shurkin. We learned Michal Shurkin this Chabura. Yeah, Rav Hutner was Rav Hutner. He once called me in, and he told me I should write him a shtickle Torah. We were learning Chulin. This was I was 17. So I was learning the Koil Goraya on President Street at that time. So I wrote him a shtickle Torah on Machlokes, the Shach, and the Ramah, and Simon Tzadik Ches, about Membamina, Bas Shema, Bas Taima. I worked very hard on it for like 3 days. And it was a few pages that came in, and I gave him the shtickle, and he sat there, he looked it over, and he said, yeah, Chagavol Zen dein Handschrift, which means he wanted to see my handwriting. He was just being provocative. That's what he was.
What did he really want?
He wanted to see my style, if I could write, if I could capture what he says. Not if I could capture a shtickle Torah, because he gave me the job of writing a shiurim. So like the last year I was in Chaim Berlin, I wrote his shiurim for him.
And you gave those
Gave them to him.
To him.
Yeah.
And he wanted them for his own private use.
I don't know. Maybe they'll be published someday. I don't know. But I gave it to him. Yes.
Does anyone have those writings today, or you don't know?
I don't know. This is many years ago. This is,
What are we talking about, in the 70s?
In the 60s.
60s.
Yeah. I went to...
Of course, we're not giving away any ages here, but...
Well... I'm past retirement age, but never retire. So then, but I was 18. I went to Lakewood. I moved to Lakewood.
How did you choose to go to Beis Medrash Gavaya?
I felt it was more for me. I felt it was better. Yaakov Bussell, who was my very, very close friend, and we were together in the Chabura, and he had gone to Lakewood, and he encouraged me to go. He said I would, and I did. I think it was a very good move. I liked it very much. I joined a very good Chabura. We learned in the back on the right corner of the Beis Medrash, there was Yerucham Olshin and Chaim Ginsberg and Nissen Goodman and Shmuel Miller and Yaakov Bussell and Yosef Frankel and Yaakov Fensterheim and Rash Bash and the beginning of Yosef Savitsky was there. Wow. It was a very chashuv olam, and I learned with this olam for a number of years. We learned Kochim. I learned Kochim there 2 years. And while we were learning Kochim, we learned Kochim in the front left corner of the Beis Medrash. And Reb Schneier,
the Rashiva.
The Rashiva of Lakewood, Reb Schneier, with whom I had a very close relationship. He used to, he was a genius. At the end of every Zman, he used to tell me, I had to write him a shtickle Torah. I had to tell him a shtickle Torah, I had to tell him a shtickle Torah. So I had Meshech Zman, I had some marachas, longer shtickle Torah, and I figured I'll go in, take me 40 minutes, yeah? So I come in and I tell him this Rambam, okay, go to the Kasha, whatever I said, he caught it like so fast, and when I said the Vart, very good. And it would took like 4 minutes or 3 minutes. I thought it would take 40. But he was a wonderful person, and I loved him. When I put out my Sefer on Shtoris, so to him
which I should mention, we have here hiding behind the books there. We have Rabbi Reinman Sefer Shufra de Shtora. Right, so we also have here. I'll grab here without knocking anything down. Shufra de Shibuda.
That's more recent.
That's more recent. Yeah. And also your Sefer on Chumash we have back here.
Yes.
And you'll be putting out a new Sefer soon on
Brera.
On Brera, Shufra de Brera.
Yes. It's almost done.
Okay.
I mean, it's typeset and everything. I just have to do the Akdama. So, so I went to, that's the whole story. I got a Haskama from Rav Shach on my Sefer. And how I ended up doing the Sefer was because Reb Schneier complained that all the best Bachrim in the yeshiva were sucked out by the Chakachim Chabura, and the yeshiva was was a little bit dry. So one Zman we were learning, I think, Tamura. So he wanted that second Seder we should learn with the yeshiva. So second Seder we learned the yeshiva was learning the second parak of Ksubis, the Sugis of Shtoris. And I loved it. It was so complicated and so difficult and so challenging and so lumdish. I loved it. So afterwards, I decided I'm going to work on Shtoris. I learned Gittin, I worked very much Shtoris. And later, maybe 10 years later, I decided I'm going to write a Sefer on Shtoris. So I had about 100 pages of Torah on Shtoris. I figured, okay, I have this, I'll do a little more, and I'll have a Sefer. So I sat down to learn Shtoris, and I think the Rabbi Shalom, when he wants you to do something, he gives you some self-delusion. You think it's going to be easy, a person gets involved, going to make a business.
Otherwise you'd never bother.
Otherwise you wouldn't do it. But once you're in it, if you have any kind of backbone, you just persevere and you do it. So I started learning Shtoris, and next thing I knew, I was like in over my head, what's going on here? The 100 pages that I had, I used practically nothing. And I had the concept of how to do it. Got too much into this. But Baruch Hashem, the Sefer, it has like 400 smaller sized prakim on all different aspects of Shtoris. And then, and I think that's why the Sefer was Matzliach.
And you have Askamas from Reb Schneier, Reb Shach, I saw Dayan Weiss.
Dayan Weiss, right? Reb Moshe. So Dayan Weiss, by the way, Reb Makil Kotler was in ArtScroll then. I didn't go to him, I didn't see him. I sent him the Sefer, he took it to Dayan Weiss, and Dayan Weiss sent me Askama. Really? And so he told me, I'm waiting, and it's nothing here. So I called him Makil, and he tells me, he sent it with this and this bacher. So I went over found the bacher, I went over to him, and I said, where's my Askama? He said, I lost it. I said, you lost it, why didn't you tell me? He didn't tell me. So I called him Makil, he got another one. And he told me the second one was better than the first.
Okay. It was Bashar.
Anyway, I went to Rav Shach to get Askama, and Rav Schneier gave me a letter to give to Rav Shach, and I came into him, have a letter. So he takes the letter, he says, Shkoyach, thank you very much. And he said, it's finished. So I said, the letter is about me. So he opens it up, and he reads the letter, and he said that, what, you need my Askama, the regular thing, yeah. And I said, listen, Shtoris is Rav Shach's, like he was an expert on it. It was very special to him also. So he said, look, he made a gather on himself that he doesn't give Askamas, but he said, because of this letter from Rav Schneier, it was very close, he said, I have no choice. So I'll give you the Askama. Do you want to leave the Sefer with me, or you want me to give you the Askama now, while I'm here? I was there for a few days. So I said, I'll leave it. So I got the Askama, I don't remember how long ago, a couple of months later, I got the Askama, and it's really, really very good Askama.
Rav Shach went through the Sefer?
I don't know if he went through every single thing, but he wrote that it should be a Sefer Shimushi, Befrat Yeshivas Hagdolos, and he said that he wanted to write Hagoyas on it, but that because of Riyosi Halakuya, because he had trouble singing those years, so he couldn't do it. But I think the Askama is even more famous than the Sefer. But Baruch Hashem. So I was saying, Rav Schneier, when the Sefer came out, and he was sick then, he was like, towards the end of his life. Right. So in his sickbed, he had that Sefer on his night table all the time. It was it meant a lot to him. So.
And at that point in your life, when you're writing Shofar D'Shtara, did you have any aspirations as far as Habatzas HaTorah outside of the yeshiva, or at that point were you...
You mean like saying Shiurim?
Yes, saying Shiurim. What was your aspiration personally?
My aspiration was to write 5 Shofras.
Really?
That was my aspiration. I thought I could do it, knock them off every year and a half, 2 years. But that was my aspiration, to write for him. I didn't have the. I guess I could have been a Rashiva Magachir,
Right.
and I didn't want to. I don't want to do that. I felt it was too restrictive.
Mm-hmm.
That I would have to be limited to, have to be busy a lot with Bachrim, and of course it's very, very rewarding, but you can't do everything, right? So, and then you have to learn the same things, and you
Right.
can't. And when I'm learning my Svarim, like Breira, I just said Breira, right? So I mean, Breira is wide ranging.
All over Shas.
All over Shas, and I could sit down and learn sugyas in Zeroyim and in Kochim and in Yuma and in Bava Basra, and I just have the freedom to learn whatever I want and to really do it, and without having to be, to adapt myself to something else. So that's I didn't want to. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I wanted to do.
Now you,
But I needed parnasa.
right?
I needed parnasa. That's a problem, I mean, so. I did a translation of Avner Samar, so I did parts of it. In those days, in the 80s, yeshivas and meisters used to send out books. I don't know if it's so common today.
Mailings, they would do mailings, right?
To raise money.
Sure.
They send out books to raise money. So I did the translation of Avner Samar, and I took parts of it, made booklets out of them, and would give them to Mifal Torah V'das was one of them. And Beis Kela in Lakewood wanted stories. So I said, okay, I'll get you stories. I figured I'll find somebody to write some stories. And not so successful finding, whatever I got, I wasn't so successful. So then we came towards, he has a mailing. He has a mailing waiting. So, and I don't have anything. So he tells me.
Who's he? Who's that?
Rabbi Shenkelevsky.
Rabbi Shenkelevsky from Beis Kela.
Rabbi Shenkelevsky. So he says, why don't you write something? So I was a good writer. I didn't aspire to writing books. I was in ninth grade. I wrote a book. I wrote a report on the automobile industry, and in Chassan Sofer still ninth grade. And the teacher, he gave me an A, but he said it's definitely plagiarized.
It was too good?
Yeah, he said he had no choice because he couldn't find it. I never plagiarized a word in my life, but I was good in English. I had really a strong interest in grammar.
Mm-hmm.
In all languages that I speak, I learned the grammar.
Mm-hmm.
I learned the science of the language, and I read a lot, and a natural born gift for writing, and I was very good. In the sixth grade was my most influential teacher.
Really?
Right? He was his name was Mr. Brown. He was a poet. He used to get up and put his chair on the desk in Chassan Sofer, and he used to recite The Telltale Heart and Edgar Allan Poe, and it was like, and he taught us different things about writing.
And you enjoyed that?
I loved it, and he gave us writing assignments, and he taught us something called fine writing, that if you use big words where you could use small words, he took off points.
Really?
Yeah, and he was I learned a lot by him, and then I was just good at it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would never, Chas v'Shalom, I'd never plagiarize a art from anybody or anything. I have too much self-respect, but this is what I did. I had an assignment, I did it, and he gave me an A because he had no proof.
It was too good.
I was innocent until proven guilty,
Mm-hmm.
but I was innocent.
So going back to the Beis
So
Kela mailing
Beis
many years
Kela,
later.
So he knew somehow, I don't remember why, that I know how to write. So he said I should write something. So, and it was late, what could I do? So there was a story that I used to tell my kids sometime, so I figured, okay, let me take that story, make something out of it. So I locked myself in a room, and I wrote The First Promised Child in 5 days. I just, stream of consciousness. I didn't outline it, I didn't do anything. I had no idea what century I was in. No idea. It was just a story. they didn't have cars. They went with wagons and horses. There were no cars. That I knew. But other than that, I didn't know. They went from Pulichev, which was in South... Pulichev is Narol, where I come from.
Right.
I knew where that was. And they went from there to Krakow. So I didn't take out a map. I didn't have time. I didn't look for anything. Every place they went to, I made up the names of every place. I made up the names of towns and cities. I just finished the story.
So in 5 days, you wrote The Promised Child.
5 days I wrote it. It was not a tremendously big book. It was like 95 pages. But I wrote it. I figured, and then I needed a name, author's
For the
name.
author.
Yeah, I didn't want to put my name on it. First of all, I thought it was just a throwaway. I didn't think it was anything. And I didn't think that, I mean, people now know me a little bit better. They know I'm, a little bit, but at that time, I thought it would be too disconcerting for somebody who wrote a sefer on Shtoras,
Right.
which is Baruch Hashem very niskabel all over the world, and to write the stories, it's incongruous. But so I figured I needed a pen name. So what kind of pen name? I like the name Avner, and I need a last name, Gold. So one of my neighbors, her aunt's name was Gold, so Gold.
So it was random. It
was
wasn't
just-
with a big cheshbon.
No cheshbon, just no cheshbon. It's not a bad name, but it's just a name. And I figured, okay, it's going to mailing, it's finished, be forgotten, and that's it. The problem, not a problem, what happened was that people liked it. They liked it, and they wanted a sequel. So now I'm going to write a sequel. So I have to figure out when the story took place. So, like the climax of The Promised Child is that there is a debate with, one of these disputations with a church in Krakow. And they asked Reb Mendel, who is the Rav of Pulichev, to come represent the Jewish community in Krakow. Now, Krakow was a major Jewish center and had huge rabbanim. So why would they go call Reb Mendel from Pulichev to come? So I had to find a gap. And I found there was a gap between the Bach and the Tosis Yontiv. The Bach was until 1640, Tosis Yontiv in 1643. There was a 3-year interregnum. And during that time, they're probably running searches. So running searches, till you go till you invite a Rav from there, it takes them a couple of weeks to come and go. It could take time. So there was a gap there. So that's where my story took place. Now I knew. Okay, so now I have to carry the story forward from then. So I had to study the centuries, the 1600s. So it turns out that it has the Tachvetat, the Cossacks, the Khmelnytsky rebellion.
Right.
Then there was Shabsai Tzvi. Then there was the expulsion from Vienna. And then there was like the big eruption of the Inquisition in the 1680s. And then there was, so it was a very rich century. And that's what I wrote about. And I just wrote one after another. I studied all of them. Like The Year of the Sword is about...
What propelled you to keep writing the books? Was it the popularity?
Yeah. Well,
People liked them.
he kept mailing them out.
Oh,
and
kept mailing them out.
people kept waiting. When's the next one coming? So I had, kept doing them. So,
And these were written mostly in the 80s, right? What would you say?
The first 8 books were written in the 80s.
In the 80s.
The last 4 were written at the end of the aughts, like 2008, 2009. That's how I decided to revive.
And these books were all rewritten, re-released now by ArtScroll.
Right. So when I decided to go to ArtScroll and write more books, I made changes. I gave, first of all, the family in the first book was called Pulichever. I didn't even bother giving them a last name.
It was based on the town.
They came from Pulichev. I called them Pulichever. I didn't bother, I'm not just saying that. And then that's what they were. But now I decided to give them a name, Strasbourg, and to give them a history, and called the series the Strasbourg Saga. So the last 4 books were written for the Strasbourg Saga. Now, recently, the last few years, I took the first 8 books and I tried to bring them up to par, and they should be like the first 8 books of the Strasbourg Saga. So I revised them, I edited them, and I added a lot. Like The Promised Child, even the earlier had also gone through several revisions, And eventually it was like, a decent-sized book. But for this, I doubled it. I wrote the first half of the book is completely new. And for each of the books, I added a lot. I also added a gadol at that time in each of the books. So anybody reading one of these books would also be introduced to a gadol who lived during that period. Not always did he play a big role. For instance, the Tosfos Yontif plays a very big role in the dream. And the story of the Tosfos Yontif that he wrote in the Megillah Seva, how he was arrested and sentenced to death, and that the whole story is in there. It's just that people didn't know.
Is that just to make the story feel real?
No, it was. What do you mean? That was the story. I made that part of the story.
Right.
I made that part of the story, and it's all true. The only thing that people didn't know was that Reb Mendel Strasberg was the one who helped get him off. But other than that, it's all true, and that they were very close friends. But other than that, it's all true. So some books, the gadol plays a much larger role, and the Marano Prince, the Magen Avram, is more like a cameo role. But it's still, you meet him, you know about his life, you know about his yeshiva, what it was like. So you get to know where he places in history and a little bit about him, sometimes more and sometimes less.
Now, where did you draw your historical knowledge? Because these books are historical fiction. There's a lot of fiction, but there's a lot of history, and it has to be accurate.
It's all very researched. I did a lot of research, even more than Wikipedia. I did a lot of research, like the Marano Prince, for instance, the last one. Now, there's a famous Marano book called Family I Aguilar from Marcus Lehman. The issue is, though, that Marcus Lehman wrote the book in the 1850s or something like that. The Inquisition was officially closed in 1837, and all its records have since then. I know people didn't know what it was about. They thought that maybe the Marano kids wore their tzitzis tucked in instead of out, but they didn't know they were Jewish till they were 19. It was too dangerous to tell them. But since then, like I read doctoral dissertations on the Inquisition. I read Henry Kamen. I read Cecil Roth. I read Ben-Sion Netanyahu, Bibi Netanyahu. I'm not a big fan of his, but I'm a very big fan of his father. Ben-Sion Netanyahu is brilliant historian. And he's the historian of the Maranos. I wrote many books about them. And I read them. He has a book called The History of Maranos According to the Hebrew Sources, and everything is taken from Rishonim. And on the bottom he has the Lashon of the Rishon in Hebrew. And so I did as much research, a lot of research.
That's on the historical side. Now on the writing side, I'm sure there are many viewers wondering how someone like you, who went through the yeshiva system, never went to college.
No.
Where did you get your writing?
I went to BMG.
You went to BMG? So you went to a Talmudical school, so to speak.
Yes.
But where did you get your training, if any, to learn writing technique, to learn vocabulary, to learn just what we have here, which is a classic set of really a very high-level writing?
I read a lot. I read very much, especially in my teenage years. I read the classics. I read, in school I had to read some books, like they gave us Grapes of Wrath, or, I could quote Shakespeare to you if you want, I can quote Macbeth, soliloquies, but we studied those then.
So when you say the classics, you mean the classics?
Well, I didn't read Shakespeare in my own time, not a lot, but I read Guy de Maupassant.
I remember
Alexander
John
Dumas,
Steinbeck from school.
John Steinbeck. I read everything he wrote. Everything. I read Sinclair Lewis. I read everything. If I liked an author, I read everything. I read Stendhal. I read Victor Hugo. I read Tolstoy, Dostoevsky, Turgenev, Sholokhov.
Someone like Victor Hugo, you read it in the original French, or did you? No.
My French is not that good. I learned French in the Chassan Sofer, by the way. Ninth grade, I learned French, 1 year. And, my class learned French, and everybody was, okay, how are we going to get through this, But I said, I want to know this. I mean, to know a language is something. It's like a rechush. It's something. So I went out and I read Kitub Maupassant. I read some of his books.
So you have an appreciation for language. That's what it sounds like. You're a linguist.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
I learned a little Russian. I can manage in a few languages, even in Yiddish. Yiddish is actually my first language.
Because actually your Rebbe, Rav Hutner, I think is quoted as saying that the average yeshiva boy is illiterate in 3 languages.
Right.
But apparently you've mastered
several.
several.
English not bad, and Yiddish is also, that's Hebrew. So in Hebrew, I can write Sforim. I know Sefer language, but to write literary Hebrew, I'm not capable. I could get through a Hebrew newspaper, but I couldn't write that type of Hebrew.
Right.
But other languages like Spanish, I can do I'm fairly fluent, but to get by. I was in Spain, I lived on Spanish, and in France, I worked in French, or Russian. Everyone says Russian. You speak Russian? Actually, my parents spoke Russian. Когда родители хотели говорить, что я не понял, говорили по-русски. That means when they wanted to speak, I should understand. They spoke Russian.
They spoke Russian, okay.
But they say, you can read Russian? Reading Russian, I knew I was 12. Because it's just an alphabet of 30 letters. And half of them are the same as English. And it's the easiest thing, it's phonetic. It's the easiest thing to read Russian. You can read Russian. Chinese would be something maybe, but Russian is very easy. And listen, I have, but...
Now I should mention, of the books that we have here,
I have a lot of...
about half of them are not of the Strasbourg series. They're books that you've written over the years.
They are Strasbourg now.
No, but I'm talking about
these.
Hearts Full of Love, Hearts Full of Faith,
yes.
other books that you were commissioned to write.
Yes.
Talk about those where you've had the opportunity to write up. You wrote up Reb Shlomo Freifeld's.
I wrote for Matzio.
Right.
I wrote for Matzio. Matzio actually is a very good friend of mine. Yeah, I'm one of his only friends. He has either Talmidim, followers, or adversaries. I'm one of his friends.
And you became friends with Ramatzio when he became a shkiach in Lakewood, or before it?
Not right away.
Uh-huh.
When he came, really not right away. But then I started learning Chumash. Which I didn't, my background, those days, they didn't learn Chumash in yeshiva, and I felt, so I started learning Chumash with a Chavrusa, and actually wrote a Sefer on Chumash right here. And I heard that he gives a vad on Chumash Motzei Shabbos. So I went there to hear what he had to say, and I liked him. I liked what he said, and I liked him. So I talked to him a little bit. I don't think he knew who I was. And so I said to him once, I said, I'd like to make a Seder with you. So he said, what? I said, maybe once a week for like 15, 20 minutes, I'll tell you my Vert on Chumash. So he said, okay. So we started like that. And then in 1999, we went to Russia together for the Vadlat Sol Snifnei Yisrael. So I told that the Jewish Observer wanted me to go along and write an article. So I said I would do it. So I told Ramatzio that I would do it if we would learn together on the trip. So we learned Chumash together. So we did. We used to sit on the plane and learn Chumash, and he said maybe we should learn other things. And then he suggested we should learn every day. So we did learn every day. We learned Erchen, we learned different things.
And how did that lead to you writing up 2 volumes of the Mashgiach Shmuzin?
I don't remember who asked me. I think it was maybe ArtScroll or somebody. Maybe ArtScroll asked me I should write it, and I got paid for it. And to write a Shmuzin, I had to. He told me he didn't think that I saw a different Shmuzin that he gave that were printed. He said he didn't think anybody could capture it and make it good. But I have an ear, for dialogue, and I knew him well. And what I did was, when I write books, dialogue, so what I do is I create the characters in my mind, and I allow them to speak to each other. I just step back and allow them to speak. It's a little schizophrenic, but I allow them to speak to each other. And they talk, and I'm writing, catching up with what they're saying.
It's almost like you're eavesdropping on their conversation?
Yeah, and sometimes they surprise me by what they say.
What do you mean by that? That your own character surprises you?
They'll say something, I mean, it's coming from that schizophrenic place in my brain.
Uh-huh.
But, you know, like there's an envoy from Vienna, the Queen says to Alicia Ringel, they're talking about expelling the Jews from Vienna. So she turns to Alicia Ringel, you're from Poland, is there room in Poland? So he says, oh, we just had a massacre. Half the people were killed. There's plenty of room in Poland. I didn't, you know, he just said that. And then she says, why do all the little guys have such sharp tongues? You know, I didn't tell her to say that either. She just said it. You know, so, you know, I create and I let them speak.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I
guess.
I guess.
Okay. All right.
I mean, the final product proved that it's a good technique.
Okay, so usually, you know, I don't put words in the mouths of my characters. I don't do that. I let them talk. So really what I did was I created a non-fictional, fictional character in my mind. Mm-hmm. His name was Romatisio, and I let him speak. Mm-hmm. And I just wrote.
And the same with Reb Shlomo Freifeld, same thing.
I had Reb Shlomo Freifeld, I met only once, but I listened to his CDs, to his shmuzin, and same with Rabbi Frand. You know, I listened to them, and
right, you wrote two svarim from three svarim from Rabbi Frand.
So one of our Freifeld's Talmidim said that I must be a Talmud of his because it sounds exactly like him, you know. But it's like I could hear it. I hear what he's saying. And I hear the language. I hear the sound of his voice. When I speak Spanish, right? So the people tell me, first of all, they tell me I sound like a professor because I speak grammatical. I learned the grammar. I speak grammatical Spanish.
Right.
Not that I'm missing words. Me faltan palabras siempre. But I'm missing words a lot. But when I speak Spanish, I don't speak like a gringo, like a North American. Si quieres, yo puedo hablar como gringo también, but I don't speak like that. So they tell me I sound like I come from Argentina or someplace else. When I was in Russia,
they think you're a native speaker.
They think I speak Spanish, but I'm from somewhere else. When I was in Russia, so in the hotel, I was speaking Russian, so she says, you know, that I speak like I'm from Russia, but not from here, from someplace else, and I don't know where. But you know, it has, I guess it's a little bit like music, or that I can hear it.
You have an ear for it.
The reason why Americans speak Spanish like that, because they don't hear the difference between what they're saying and what they're hearing.
The nuances.
They don't hear the sound. The sound of the language, they don't hear it. So
now, before we conclude, tell us a little about what you've heard from readers, because I know you've gotten a lot of reaction over the years, letters,
hundreds of emails,
literally hundreds of letters, emails that people tell you. What is the common denominator of the feedback? Specifically, we know to your svarim, but
I don't get hundreds of letters on my svarim. I get some, but not hundreds.
But to the Avner Gold
audience
series
is much smaller. But that's my audience.
But you know, you say these books were written ben gavra legavra. Your main writing are your svarim.
My main thing is writing svarim. When I write a book, I'll take off a few weeks or a couple of months, and I'll write the book. But that's not.
But what is the common denominator as far as the feedback?
They all love the stories, the excitement, the adventure, but they also love the values that are given to them. They love, like people say, that they've used my books as guiding them through life. Really? The relationship to Torah, the relationship to mitzvahs. I don't lecture about that, but it's there. In all my books, there's a lot of. In my later books, I started putting in a Dvar Torah from my Chumash Sefer, a small one. But okay, I figured, you know, you could tolerate that. But there's a lot of values that come from the Bais Medrash. They come from the Bais Medrash, and I don't know how many books that are in our literature come from the Bais Medrash. I'm simply not familiar. I'm not saying I'm the only one. There may be others, but it's certainly not as common as books that don't come from Bais Medrash, especially the books that are written by the Noshim Tzidkaniyos, who are wonderful. Our women are fabulous, but they don't come from Bais Medrash. They don't have that type of background, type of china. So I feel that it's also important to have that perspective added to the mix of what people read, and it really has a very profound effect on them. People are like, very excited. I also always respond to readers, always. First of all, I love getting letters from the readers. I love it.
Okay, that's good for people to know.
Yes, absolutely. My email is in the forward, but it's just simply a matter of respect that if somebody writes to me, I will respond. So sometimes it could take me a month or two till I get to it, but I always respond. And with some of my readers, it ends up being a correspondence. Sometimes it's just thank you very much, I appreciate it. It means a lot to me. And sometimes it's about substance, and we have discussions, and it's very important to me. It means a lot.
Well, your story is an amazing one, and we want to wish you continued atzlacha on the Svarim and
Thank
Hashem.
you.
We hope that you'll write some more books also.
Mirz
Thank
Hashem,
Avner Gavra, Mirz Hashem, to the benefit of Klal Yisrael.
Thank you.
And we thank you for all these gifts that you've given us.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you coming in.
And I want to tell you something.
Yeah.
I came here today, and there was a yard side Suda.
Right, we could mention that this conversation is taking place on the yard side of Reb Meir's Ladowitz.
Right. And I told before, I met with Rabbi Sherman, and I told him, and I really mean it, that what they have done, Reb Meir and Reb Nosson and Reb Shia, what they have done is historic. It belongs in the history books that will be written 300 years from now. It's amazing what they've done. And I'm happy to be part of it.
Well, thank you for being part of the ArtScroll family. And again, thank you for making the effort to come down here and have this conversation.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Hatzlacha.
Thank you.